With the Federation in a vulnerable state, and its member worlds demanding a quick and satisfying solution, Starfleet Command would do something it had never done before: mass-produce a single class of starship that could fill multiple mission roles for the organization. And this class, known as the Inquiry class, would become one of the most versatile starship designs ever created by Starfleet. But what do we know about this copy and paste design? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon, a Star Trek web series that dives into the history of any given topic using beta canon sources and my own imagination to fill in the gaps. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Inquiry class as first seen in Star Trek Picard Season 1, to better understand its place in Star Trek history. I'd like to also take a moment to thank Mark Bell for his awesome model of the Inquiry class. Though originally I wasn't really a fan of this design, it's actually grown on me thanks to his 3D model, so check out the links to his site in the description below. And of course, as always, because this is a beta canon video, all information relayed should pretty much be taken with a grain of stardust, and only considered a little bit of Star Trek fun. And so, with all that out of the way, let's begin. The Synth Attack had Starfleet and the Federation running scared. In an effort to save the Romulan species as well as several other species in its surrounding space, Starfleet had built an armada of transports which could, if successful, evacuate all humanoid life within the danger zone. Not only that, but Starfleet had recalled almost 2/3 of its own fleet to various space docks throughout the Federation for immediate and quick refit to become colony vessels. These starships were then to proceed to evacuation sites where they would use their industrial replicators to keep these colonies afloat until their own resources could be deployed to sustain those colonies. The main stage for the construction and refit of all vessels was Utopia Planitia, the shipyards orbiting Mars. Increased massively in size to include all of near-Mars space, this construction yard now had the capability of building or servicing almost 13,000 vessels at a time. In fact, so jam-packed was this expanded shipyard that some classes of Starfleet starships couldn't even navigate through in order to orbit Mars itself. But of course, the expansion of Utopia Planitia was only to be a temporary measure, until the evacuation of Romulus was complete, and so no one was concerned. But then, on April 5th, 2385, all hell broke loose. Because it was First Contact Day, a Federation holiday, Utopia Planitia was running on a skeleton crew that was augmented by a synthetic workforce. Most already assigned starship crews were on shore leave on Earth, celebrating that monumental historical event, while seemingly out of nowhere, the synthetic population malfunctioned, going rogue, and began a full-scale attack on the shipyard. And this attack would have devastating consequences for the fleet, because each of the construction docks were so tightly packed for the rescue effort. The destruction of a few vessels within them did major damage and destruction to the other vessels being constructed around them, basically causing a domino effect. And by the end of the attack, the entire fleet of transport vessels, as well as most of the Starfleet vessels put into dock for colony conversion, had been destroyed. After years of internal conflicts such as the Riemann Uprising, and with all the heavy losses suffered during the Dominion War, the Star Empire itself was also vulnerable. Add to that the Free Romulan movement had various colonies and occupied planets seemingly rising up against the Romulan Star Empire on a daily basis, and Romulus itself no longer had the resources to conduct a complete evacuation of its own home world. But this was no longer a concern for the Federation, but instead their concern now was for their own fleet. Oddly, one of the big concerns again was Romulus. Several member worlds who had always been against the Federation helping the Romulans to begin with, and were the ones pushing the Romulan-Synth connection as a narrative, were now pushing the possibility that the Romulan Star Empire had engineered the entire matter in order to destroy most of the Federation fleet as a prelude to invasion. And although again this was completely an illogical idea, the hysteria over the Synth Attack drove many citizens within the Federation to support this idea, and demanded Starfleet come up with an immediate solution, and Starfleet would. First, all starships in the various other construction facilities throughout the Federation would be retrofitted back to their normal configurations, and launched to the Federation Romulan border. Second, construction on all transport-style starships would cease, and disassembly for the resources contained within those vessels would be quickly undertaken. And finally, a single starship class being developed by Starfleet's top starship design team would be rolled out with several hastily developed variants in design to replace the starships destroyed during the Synth Attack. And thus, the Inquiry class would be born. Sitting at a length of approximately 640 meters, the Inquiry class would be designed to be operated by 100 officers and crew members, although in normal operations, this class would contain a crew of 500 or more. Although large in size, the class was actually easily constructed. This was due to several factors. First, its simple streamlined design allowed for a much shorter construction period than most other vessels of its size. Also, its internal components and arrangement was equally streamlined, allowing construction yard replicators to easily churn out the various materials needed for this design. In fact, instead of the usual 1 to 2 year construction period for a class this size, an Inquiry-class vessel could be constructed in only 8 months. Utilizing every new bit of technology developed by Starfleet over the recent years, the Inquiry class would also be the most powerful and fastest starship class created up to this point in Starfleet history. Her new warp core would allow the Inquiry class to be the first vessel class to have a sustainable safe cruising speed of warp factor 9, with an emergency maximum speed of warp factor 9.999. Tactically, the Inquiry class would sport the latest in phaser emitter design, as well as a new Starship Phaser Cannon emitter system developed based on the Defiant class's successful system. Shielding for this class would be multiphasic regenerative shields based on technology developed by the USS Voyager while stranded in the Delta Quadrant. Even the Inquiry class's main deflector dish would get an extreme upgrade, including a specially designed grate which would provide additional protection for the dish. Internally, the starship would have 4 distinct configurations. One would be a purely tactical vessel, which would include additional weapon systems batteries as well as weapon storage. This variant would also have a larger security force posted on them, with fighter and tactical shuttlecraft which could be easily deployed during combat maneuvers. A second tactical science hybrid would also be created. This variant would replace the additional weapon systems with scientific laboratories and sensor equipment. The third variant would be an engineering tactical hybrid, again replacing the vessel's additional weapon systems with construction and repair facilities. The final variant of the design would be a tactical transport design. This style of class would replace the additional weapon systems with cargo bays that could themselves be quickly converted to barrack-style facilities for troop transport should a war break out. The entire Inquiry-class project was highly classified, meaning that the Federation's public was not informed of the class until its launch in mid-2386, when over 1,000 vessels of the class suddenly appeared on the Federation's news service. Of course, by its launch, war with the Romulan Star Empire was one of the most unlikely events in Federation history. This was because, after the withdrawal of assistance by the Federation, the Romulan Star Empire basically collapsed. As a result, the Free Romulus movement gained traction, and had begun to become one of the largest factions remaining within the Empire. And this faction did not blame Starfleet or the Federation for their withdrawal from assisting the Romulan people, seeing the entire matter as a form of logical karma brought about by the Star Empire's continual bad behavior. And the other remaining factions, such as the Tal Shiar and the original governmental faction, no longer had the people or the forces to be a real threat to anyone, especially the Federation. And thus a slow peace process would begin between these two very old enemies, eventually leading the Romulan society to reunification with its Vulcan cousins, and also becoming valued members of the Federation. As for the Inquiry class, she would perform quite well in all the roles she was designed for. However, when normal construction operations would once again begin for Starfleet's shipyards, construction of the Inquiry class would be immediately halted in favor of the traditional various vessel design philosophy that had prevailed in Starfleet starship designs since the concept of Starfleet Command itself. Of course, this left the general population of the organization wondering why Starfleet would return to this philosophy, and the answer is really a twofold simple one. First, though performing well within its variant designs, the Inquiry class never did outperform those vessel classes that were purely scientific and exploration in nature. And second, different and new starship designs ignited the imagination of Starfleet's starship designers, allowing for many new breakthroughs as well as refinements of technology for those other vessel classes, allowing the organization to continue to grow and develop as a whole. Although a cookie-cutter style vessel class, designed for a war which never came, the Inquiry class proved itself a valuable necessity for the fleet, earning the Inquiry class its essential place in Starfleet history. Thank you for watching today's episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon. What do you think of the Inquiry class and the historical narrative that I've created here? Do you want to see more videos like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel mass produce itself to augment the Federation fleet? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.